Hey, what is up? This is Kevin with a League of Legends video. Today's video is themed comebacks. And well, I felt this was a good enough comeback to make a video about it, so let's get going here. I'm playing as Caitlyn. I start out really bad. I pretty much feed the Angel dude, which by the way, he's a really good player, so keep an eye out for him. He pretty much dominates the whole team, but we pretty much come back and beat this other team. I think at one point we even surrender, or try to surrender, but thankfully it doesn't pass, and we go into victory. As for content for this video, I'm going to try something different with text-to-speech. I found a nice little short story I'm going to post in here. The short story is actually a little longer than this video, but I don't know, I'm going to see if I can get permission to use it and see how it works with this video. So if you want to listen to like a short story while watching this, go ahead. Anyways, leave a little feedback how you like it too. And that said, it's time to come back, yeah. Or suck starting out.
How it all began. He was sitting down against a tree, staring out into the brilliant sunset. He wasn't alone, however. She was there with him, her head on his lap, her breathing content as he ran his fingers through her mane. They were together, they were young, they were in love. Some called it destiny that they were together, an alicorn and the only recorded human in existence. Some called it an abomination, two different species together. Royalty and a commoner were never meant to mix. Their precious bloodline would suffer otherwise. But the two lovers didn't care, they loved each other and nobody could ever tell them otherwise. But some ponies were angry, insane and refused to let this love blossom. And so it happened, under the cover of night. When the two lovers had just gave in to their passion, unable to keep themselves from each other any longer, they came brandishing weapons of war and violence. The human awoke first, seeing the weapon so close to his beloved, and reacted violently. The guards came into the room, seeing the human wounded and bleeding, his lover beside him, tears in her eyes. The assassins were dead, killed by the human's hands. They brought forth their best healers, but the poison had spread quickly and was slowly killing him. But then a solution was brought forth by the alicorn's mother and father themselves. They talked to the human, the one they were prepared to call their own son, and gave him a choice. Stay and slowly die in the hooves of his beloved, surrounded by family and friends. Or be sent away to a human dimension, memories forgotten but body reborn and well. He turned to his loved one and asked what she wanted. She was distraught and angry, but knew what had to be done to save her loved one. She turned back to her lover and begged him to go, in the hope that one day, he would return to her and accept her love again. She flared up her magic and performed the most sacred spell to Ponykin. She looked at her love, his eyes heavy and his limbs numb. With only a second of hesitation, she thrust her horn into his skull, performing the magic that would one day bind them together again. Whether he remembered it or not. It was 2 in the afternoon and in the city of Manchester an 18-year-old teenager was gazing at his computer monitor, trying to figure out what in the world was causing it to blue screen him every 5 minutes. He jumped suddenly as his alarm went off by his bed, signaling that he had to get a move on, lest he be late for college again. He quickly grabbed his shoulder bag and trench coat, giving his computer a sharp kick before running down the stairs and out of the door. He looked back at the building and sighed. It reminded him of what he didn't have every day. He was an orphan, found outside of this very building not 18 years ago. Nobody knew who his parents were or how he had even got there. Some investigators looked into it, but it was as though he just appeared out of nowhere. And so it known that the young man was not only parentless but also a magical freak. He didn't care what others thought about him though. He had managed to make a group of nice friends at the college, and seeing that it was an adult program, barely anyone bothered with him there. The young man reached his bus stop and flashed his pass at the driver. He was a friendly guy who knew what the teen went through most of the time, and so made sure not to charge him if he ever forgot his pass. "Afternoon, Chris, it's a bit late for college today, isn't it?" he asked. "Yeah, I guess it is, but you know how these timetables work. They change and you have to adapt with you having no say in the matter whatsoever," Chris replied sarcastically. Chris. It was the only thing he had on him when he was found, his name, but only his first one. His last name was Higant, given to him by the caretaker who looked after him during his childhood. Chris knew that the caretaker had a son once, whose last name was Higant. He had passed away in his teenage years due to a gunshot wound. Chris felt awkward at first to have it, but soon accepted it as he realized that the caretaker merely looked at him like a son. He had felt happy beyond everything when he realized this, having never felt close to anyone in his life. He could never explain why personally, even the orphanage psychiatrist who was friendly and warm with everyone couldn't pluck this piece of information out of him. But not 2 years ago tragedy struck. The caretaker had a heart attack in the middle of a storm. Nobody found him until the next day, and by then it was far too late. And Chris was alone once again. Chris shook his rapid thinking out of his mind and stared out of the window, watching as the cars droned by, filled with people ready to do their daily and repetitive lives. It was in this boredom that he fell back into his own routine, daydreaming impossible things. He was lying on a bed in a white room. Its walls were decorated with pink and cyan lines that filled every part of the room with a cheerful glow. A figure was on top of him. He couldn't see her face nor her body, but he knew it was someone dearly important to him. "So what do you want to do now, Chris?" she asked flirtatiously, rubbing his chest seductively. "I'm not sure, Tia. Maybe we can watch the sunset again, or go and thank little Lulu," he replied coyly. The figure giggled musically, before kissing up his neck with gentle butterfly kisses. "Come now, Chris, Lulu will only prank us back harder, and it is a few hours until sunset at the least. Perhaps we could take our time with each other. I've been wondering if. Chris put his hand on her blurred face, knowing what to touch and caress despite the sight issue. "Tia. I told you that I would wait until you are ready. I will not now nor ever force this upon you." "I know, Chris, it's just that. I think I'm ready now." Chris felt a brief bout of excitement tickle him, but pushed it aside. His feelings for her were too important to be placed second to passion. "Are you sure, Tia? I can wait for as long as you need." Tia caressed his face with something. It didn't feel like a hand, it was smoother and harder than one. "I'm ready, Chris. I want this. I want us to be united. I want us to be one. I want you to be my first. And I to be your last." She took a deep, shaky breath before lowering her face to his own, her warm breath coating his lips. "Make love to me, Chris. Chris." Chris snapped out of his daydream and rubbed his eyes, noticing that the bus had reached its final stop, his college. "Sorry, Steve, I was gone there for a few seconds," he said sheepishly. "A few seconds? You were gone for about 15 minutes. Are you sure you're okay?" he replied with concern. Chris walked down the bus and patted him on his shoulder. "Don't worry, Steve, it was just a daydream." Steve grinned and wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. "Oh? One of those fantasies, was it?" Chris rolled his eyes and got off the bus, waving to the still chuckling bus driver as he closed the door and drove away. The young man walked through the college doors and went over to the stairs. He grinned and climbed them 3 at a time, reaching the floor he was supposed to be at in seconds. He turned to his right and momentarily spotted a mirror. In it was a young man. He had messy black hair that stood up in every direction. His eyes were an intelligent blue that always gave off a vibe of being older than he was. His body was slightly toned, but lack of food had always left him a little malnourished, which showed clearly as you could see his ribs if he took his t-shirt off. He was wearing a white t-shirt with loose and faded jeans. His trench coat was similar to a black gothic one and was given to him by the caretaker a few weeks before he died. Finally, his shoes were a pair of normal trainers that were slightly aged and one size too small. Taking his eyes off of his reflection, the young man entered his classroom and sat down at the back, waiting for everyone else to come and putting his earbuds in his ears, turning on his MP3 player and selecting a slow, sad piano tune called A River Flows in You. He looked up at the clock and sighed as he realized that he still had 30 minutes until people started to arrive. He closed his eyes and leaned backwards, letting the soothing music calm him down as his mind wandered, forming yet another daydream for him to enjoy. He was sitting against a tree, staring out at the beautiful sunset and enjoying the relaxing scene around him. He felt a certain someone nuzzling his hand and smiled, stroking her hair and letting his fingers run against her scalp, essentially giving her a massage. "It's beautiful, don't you think, Chris?" she asked quietly. "Yeah, she is," he replied, looking down at the blurred figure and yet somehow knowing that she was smiling up at him. A few minutes passed them by, but for the two of them it would never matter. This was perfect, the sunset, the birds singing and the one they loved the most beside them. "Chris, did you hear about the nobles yesterday?" she asked worriedly. Chris shook his head and looked down at her in concern. "No, I didn't." "Why? What's the matter?" "They're demanding that we be separated because of the royal bloodline and its possibility of being tainted," she replied. Her voice caught in her throat at the word separated and Chris instantly shushed her soothingly, pulling her up gently and holding her to his chest. "We won't be separated, Tia. You and I both know that your parents would never agree to such a thing." Tia tried to agree with a hum, but her voice trembled and she started to cry on him. I know, B, but why must they wish this in the first place? I love you, Chris. And the thought of being torn away from you." She looked up at his eyes and whimpered as the thought of never seeing them again haunted her mind. "Chris. Promise me that you won't ever leave me." Tia. "Please," she croaked weakly. "Promise me, Chris." Chris closed his eyes and breathed out heavily. He then opened them again and regarded her warmly. "I promise, Tia, I won't ever leave you." Somewhere in another dimension, Celestia opened her eyes as the words still echoed in her mind. She blinked and shook it off, focusing instead on the notes in front of her. There was a sudden knock on her door that made her jump slightly. She then went over to it and opened it. She was graced by the presence of her sister, Princess Luna. Said jeweler was smiling at her and was starting to talk. "Good afternoon, sister. I have some news for you if you would let me in." Celestia smiled and moved to the side so that Luna could enter. She then closed her door and turned to face her little sister. "What's this news then, Lulu? Has there been another problem in Ponyville? Surely my students would handle it if it were so, otherwise she would have sent me a letter." "I know, sister. Ponyville is well as far as I know. My news regards something else entirely." Celestia raised an eyebrow as her sister's news. Having received some of her news 5 times in the past month. "Luna, I have already told you that I am not interested in you being matchmaker to me and some random stallion." Luna's face fell somewhat at her sister figuring out her plan. "But sister, you look so glum all the time. Surely you wish for someone to relax with at the least?" Celestia sighed and shook her head at her. "Lulu, I know that you mean well, but I'm just not interested in a relationship at the moment." Luna's eyes narrowed in suspicion at this and trotted over to Celestia, looking at her eyes as she asked her question. "You've been thinking about him again, haven't you?" she asked softly. Celestia's eyes twitched in sadness for a brief second before she shook her head. "Not at all, Luna. I just don't feel like being a relationship at the moment is all." Luna saw through her sister's lie and was having none of it. She walked right up to her sister's face and asked her carefully. "And if he were to return? Would you be interested then?" Celestia's eyes flashed with anger momentarily before becoming sad and looking down at the ground. "I can't help it, Luna. It's been happening now more than ever. I don't know why, but I just. Luna, you know what magic I performed all those years ago. I couldn't love another even if I desired to. I know, Tia. But you can't keep thinking about him. If you do, then we both know that it only leads to you being depressed and me having to pick up the pieces." Celestia felt a guilty emotion pass through her at this. It was true though, every so often throughout her long life she would remember him. And would always become too upset to focus properly. Fortunately, her younger sister had been there to help her back onto her heels every time. Her 1,000-year exile made Celestia focused and took her mind off of the past. But now that the Princess of the Night had returned over a year ago, her mind had finally cracked and 1,000 years of repressed thoughts flowed out of her every few months. Luckily, she was clever enough to release her emotions within her private room. Luna would eventually come to her and together they would hold each other and remember the good old days before everything fell to them. Celestia knew that the chance of her loved one returning was less than none, and her mind was slowly accepting this. Fortunately, that was all about to change. In the center of Ponyville there was a single tree house. Said tree house was in fact a library that belonged to none other than Twilight Sparkle, Celestia's most faithful student and the most magically talented unicorn in Equestria. Twilight, how many times have you done something like this before? Asked a very annoyed Spike. Oh come on Spike, what's the problem with a little trial and error? Twilight replied smoothly. Generally the way that it's mostly error not trial. Twilight glared at him momentarily before readjusting the runes she had placed around the room. Spike, if this works then I would have successfully become the first unicorn to have ever pulled a creature from a different part of this world into a place where it is rarely seen. Spike rolled his eyes at her enthusiasm but couldn't deny that seeing another creature made him a little curious. Twilight, however, was looking at a complicated looking diagram of some sort of bipedal creature. What creature are you going to summon anyway? Spike asked questioningly. Well, it's apparently called a human but it hasn't been seen in almost 2,000 years. Spike regarded her skeptically and tapped her leg to get her attention. If it's been gone for so long then what makes you think that it's even alive? Twilight put a hook to her mouth and seemed deep in thought for a moment. Well, the book said that one day there was something called a human that populated Equestria 2 millennia ago, but that it just vanished mysteriously and hasn't been seen since. Anyway, there are plenty of books that say that there was actually more than one of them here. It could be a lie to deceive us or it might just be true. Who knows until I try this. Spike sighed deeply and gave up on trying to dissuade her, choosing instead to stand by the stairs and watch her perform the spell. Twilight took a few steps back and focused on the spell, her horn starting to glow as it began to take effect. From there to here I call you to me. A creature from Equestria that used to be free. But now there is nothing left of thee. And so I call you now. Come to me. Twilight opened her eyes in disappointment as nothing happened, sighing for the 10th time that day and preparing to give it up and go join Rarity for some dinner. Suddenly a flash of lightning struck outside, followed by numerous screams of terror. Twilight raced outside and watched open-mouthed as a gigantic purple swirl of energy formed in the center of the village. Twilight looked to her left as the wind picked up dramatically, forcing some ponies to fly backwards. She spotted Applejack, Rainbow Dash, Fluttershy, Pinkie Pie and Rarity walking to her. They were struggling against the wind but made their way over to her. The sky above them turned dark and flashed with uncontrolled lightning, the clouds becoming dark and stormy. What in the name of Equestria is going on, Twilight? Asked Rarity. She had an umbrella held by magic so that her coat and mane didn't get messy. I think it was a spell I tried. Twilight yelled over the wind. It was supposed to open a small portal, not one of this magnitude. Well, I don't think it matters now, Twilight. Yelled Applejack. What does matter now is do you know how to reverse it? Twilight shook her head at this. There wasn't actually a reversal spell. The creature was supposed to come through the portal, which would then close behind it. The only way to return it would be to do another spell, which would take considerably longer to set up and prepare for. Sorry, but I think we'll need the princess for this one. She yelled to her friends. They nodded in agreement as they followed Twilight back into her house, where she instantly began to write a letter. Dear Princess Celestia, a few minutes ago I tried to do a summoning spell, but it has gotten out of control and I cannot close the portal. I don't know what to do and I am so sorry for wasting your time with my problem, but I fear what would happen if it does not close, seeing as it is affecting the weather of its own accord. Please hurry. Your faithful student, Twilight Sparkle. She turned to Spike, who nodded and breathed fire on the scroll, burning it to a crisp and watching as its magical remains floated rapidly over to the castle. Celestia and Luna had been talking for the past 15 minutes and were actually having a fun time joking with one another. Unfortunately, their moment was broken up by a popping sound as a scroll magically appeared in front of Celestia's face. I guess Twilight has another friendship report for me. Celestia chuckled. Luna giggled and moved around to read it with her. Both of their expressions became worried as they finished it. looking at one another and sighing in slight annoyance. Well, Lulu, I best be off to help her with this. I'd imagine I will be back in about 10 minutes or so. Are you alright to wait for me? Luna rolled her eyes, headed towards the door. If it is only going to take 10 minutes, dear, then I believe it would be no trouble to assist you with this. Besides, it has been quite some time since the citizens of Ponyville have seen me. Celestia smiled at her sister and walked over to her, preparing to teleport. Alright then, little sister, but be swift and make sure to bring some guards. We don't know what might come out of this portal if I do not close it in time. Luna smiled widely and nodded, padding off quickly to round up a couple of the guards. Celestia laughed quietly and teleported out of her room. The next thing she knew, she was standing in a panic-stricken Ponyville. Ponies were running in every direction and screaming. It was then that Celestia noticed the portal hanging in midair, as well as the uncontrollable weather. The ponies seemed to suddenly realize that Celestia was amongst them, stopping their panicking to bow, before running in every direction once again. Celestia rolled her eyes at this and went a little closer to the portal. Her sister arrived next to her in a flash of light, her guards right behind her. This is powerful magic, Tia. Twilight should be proud to have done it. She yelled easily over the wind. Celestia was thinking the same thing and felt quite proud to have her under her wing. But like most magic, it was full of successes and failures. And it was clear which Twilight had been a victim of. She nodded to Luna and together they started to close it, only to stop suddenly as two creatures fell out of it. About 10 minutes ago, Earth, Manchester, February 22, 2013. Chris was walking his way back to the orphanage, cutting through his usual shortcuts of alleyways. He had had a rough day at college, having been caught asleep twice and daydreaming twice that. He sighed in annoyance at his attention span, but he just never found school or college interesting. It just felt boring, as though it held little meaning to him anyway. He has just cut through another alleyway when he felt an immense pain on the back of his head. He hit the ground and just about heard someone laughing at him. Chris shook the pain off and stood up, turning around to face the person who hit him. He narrowed his eyes as he was unfortunately graced with the orphanage bully Dan Summers. Now Dan had been a thorn in his side ever since he had arrived at their doorstep. He was 5 years older than Chris and had tormented him all his life, stealing his rare amounts of food, pushing him off swings when he was little, attacking him without warning for the past 5 years. Chris had had all that he could get, and the only reason he took it was because Dan was looked after by the head of the orphanage. So if he were to fight back, Dan had only to call for his mommy and Chris would be kicked out of there faster than he could blink. Chris sighed in frustration and turned away from Dan. Said person didn't like this and ran at him, aiming his fist at the back of his head. Chris saw this coming, however, and merely moved to the left, sticking his foot out and tripping the bully up. Dan growled and got back onto his feet. Instead of hitting Chris, however, he resorted to his lowest tactic. You got so lucky there, magic freak. But then again, if your parents sent you here magically, then it only makes sense that you would use it. Oh yeah, that's right, you have no parents. Ha ha ha. You don't have any either, idiot. Chris muttered. Huh? What was that, you emo bitch? I said you don't have any either, dumbass. Chris was fuming now. He never liked it when his lack of parents was mentioned. Sure, he had gotten used to it, but that never meant he still didn't feel the pain. Dan spat on the ground next to him and pulled out a knife, instantly causing Chris to put his hands up defensively. Whoa there, Dan. Put that away, you don't want to be arrested for something like killing me, do you? Dan merely smirked and advanced on him. Arrested? Nah, I'll be out of here before the cops even know. I mean, with no parents to wonder where you are, no janitor to sweep up your sorry corpse, and how even the orphanage doesn't care about you. So I think I'll get away with this just fine, and anyway, I've always wanted to wipe your stain off of my home. Chris didn't get to respond as Dan started running at him. He put his hands up in an attempt to grab the knife once he got too close, but was suddenly swept up off his feet and pulled down into the earth. Unfortunately, Dan had already jumped at him and had grabbed onto his long coat, so he ended up being pulled with him. What's going on? Help somebody. Chris felt himself being pulled down and down and down until he felt like he might suffocate. Then he suddenly felt a gust of air hit him and he was thrown onto the ground. Dan landed on top of him dazedly, but then suddenly noticed how close he was to Chris. Without bothering to check his surroundings, he attempted to stab Chris but was shoved off by him before he could, missing him and hitting the ground. Dan ignored the vibration in his hand and lunged again, grinning when he felt the knife sink into Chris's stomach. Chris felt the knife in his stomach. It was like a burning coal and boy did it hurt. He looked down at it wearily and fell to his knees. Suddenly he was assaulted by an intense vision. He was lying against a bed, a knife was in his stomach. He looked up and saw a group of bird beings attempting to attack someone. He couldn't control what he saw or did, he could only watch. And watch he did as he felt himself rising to his feet, pulling the knife out of his body and charging at a blurred figure. He felt the swift connect with the figure's face, which swiftly came into focus as dawned. Chris watched as Dan began to fly backwards in slow motion, the vision still playing out in his mind. The words, the feelings, the pain. He couldn't help it, in both the vision and reality he yelled out, "Run, Tia!" Dawn's last expression was one of shock and confusion, before he fell into the swirling energy behind him. It closed instantly as it reclaimed its prize, leaving nothing but an eerie silence in its wake. "Crap, this hurts." He put a hand to his wound and touched it gingerly, wincing as hot pain washed over him. He suddenly heard a clopping sound behind him and spun around, wincing yet again as the pain hit him harshly. But then it stopped. He didn't feel a thing. The silence seemed to intensify as he stared at the being in front of him. It was a pure white horse or maybe a really tall and slender pony. It had a horn on its head and wings folded in by its side. He noticed a picture of the sun on its flank as well as its flowing tail, which was the same color as its mane. Orange, blue, green and gray. But its eyes, those eyes seemed to stare right into his soul. Her eyes were an intelligent blue, the same color as his own. But those eyes, they also scared him. He could feel himself getting one hell of a headache the longer he looked at them. He looked away as his stab wound flared up again, forcing him to collapse to his knees. "Oh God, this hurts. Chris." He heard the sound of clopping and noticed the slender pony running over to him, tears in her eyes. Other ponies had stopped and watched in utter confusion as their princess started to fawn over this unusual creature. "See Chris, is that really you?" Chris blinked in surprise as he said his name. "How do you know my name? Where am I?" He watched in confusion as the corner of her eyes seemed to fill with tears. She then closed them and nodded. "Of course you wouldn't remember. You were reborn when you were sent away. So there should be an imprint of some kind left from before. We only need to." She opened her eyes and pointed her horn at his wound. It began to glow, which frightened the living hell out of Chris. He sprang uneasily to his feet and started to back away. "Stay away from me." He yelled out for more like groaned painfully as his wound gave another twitch of agonizing pain. Celestia felt nothing but hurt as he said this, but knew that he was only scared and didn't have a clue where he was or who she was. But he shouted my name. It sounded identical to the night when he he. She shook the sidebar from her head and tried to calmly reason with him. "Please listen to me, Chris. My name is Princess Celestia. I am the CEO ruler of Equestria and I'm here to help you. You just need to trust me." Chris's eyes seemed to widen as she said her name. It sounded eerily familiar to him for some reason. "Celestia?" The princess nodded at this, noticing the aching familiarity in which he said it. Celestia. Tia. Chris didn't know why he was repeating her name. It just sounded so familiar to him, like he had heard it before. Especially the last three letters. Tia. Celestia couldn't help but smile as he said his pet name for her. "Celestia is a long name, you know. What if you're attacked? By the time I've said your name you would be dead and the ones responsible would be halfway back to Manhattan." But then it all went horribly wrong. Chris suddenly felt an immense pain in his head. It hurt like nothing he had ever felt in his life. The knife wound was dwarfed by it along with every other feeling. Celestia noticed this and realized what was happening to him. The magic she had performed so long ago was taking effect. All she had to do was touch him and they would be together once again. She moved slowly over to him but was unsuccessful in her goal as he noticed her getting closer to him and started to run away. Celestia's eyes widened and she tried to hold him with magic. But it simply wouldn't work on him. The bond. It must be blocking out all outside magic. Even my own. Chris noticed that she hadn't stopped chasing after him and quickened up his speed, somehow fighting off the excruciating pain running through his head and stomach. He noticed a forest in front of him and quickly went into it, looking back quickly and noticing that she had stopped chasing him. But her eyes. They implored him to stop, to turn back. To come back to her. He shook off the feeling and continued his way into the forest, hoping to get as far away from her as possible, hoping that the pain would soon stop. Celestia felt tears pooling in her eyes and blinked them away. It would do no good for her subjects to see her like this. I can cry later, but for now I need to get him back. Who knows what he might come across in there. She suddenly saw the elements running past her and caught hopeful little snippets from some of them. Don't you worry none, princess, we'll get him back. He has to come back. I want to throw a party. You can count on us, princess, we'll find him for you. Celestia watched as they all went into the ever-free forest, worry adding to her already worried mind. She turned to her left as she felt someone nuzzle her cheek comfortingly. I shall go with them, Tia, you go back and comfort our subjects. Do not worry, we will find Chris. Celestia took a shaky breath and nodded to her sister. She wanted to go after Chris. He was only scared and hurt, and those two things combined could get him. She shook her head and walked back to her subjects, telling them that the panic was over and for them to return to their day. They all bowed respectfully at her and did as she said, although one or two did start whispering to one another. She looked back at the forest and unwillingly let loose a single tear. Please come back to me. End of part 1. So what do you think? If you like it, review and tell me so. If not, then do the same. And then get out. Just kidding, I like any form of criticism and only ignore flames and hurtful remarks. If you have any questions, then PM me or chuck it in a review. Peace everybody.